What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through the fun task of re-ranking the 2025 NFL draft class from a Dynasty fantasy football perspective. I think this is a really interesting class because when we're just looking at their production in year one from like a redraft perspective, we didn't really have any like nuclear performers. A lot of these guys, at least the early round dudes, were not amazing picks in terms of like their year one production. But overall, I'd say I'm pretty high on this class. I think we did have some players that were trending up kind of rest of season. Some guys maybe that dealt with injuries were banged up, but I'm really high on them heading into next season. So this is going to be fun. Will be including round one rookie picks for 2026. So I'll have like the individual picks through round one slotted into these rankings to kind of show you how I view this class compared to the potential picks you guys might have for 2026. So if you enjoy the video, do me a favor, hit that like button and subscribe. Would love to hear your thoughts down below. I'm sure within certain tiers, there's going to be, not a ton of consensus, some disagreement. So if you'd like to make your case for a player, drop it down below. And then just going through the settings, this is going to be super flex, PPR, 0.5 tight end premium. So keep all that in mind. But now let's dive into tier one here. And I'm actually going to be starting it off not with a player, but a rookie pick. And I'm going to go with the rookie 101 here. I know some people might prefer, one of the more established assets, the guys in 2025 who played and played well. But personally, I would take Jeremiah Love over any player in this draft class. He's likely going to be the 101 in like 99% of rookie drafts for 2026. I think he's a super talented prospect. I think from a prospect perspective, I like him a little bit more than Ashton Genty. And then I also think he has the upside to land in a more favorable situation than where we saw Genty land last year. So Jeremiah Love, the rookie 101, that's going to take my top spot. And then my other tier one asset, it's going to be Ashton Genty. I know some people have kind of cooled off on Ashton Genty. They're fading him after, the rougher rookie season. Maybe you prefer, a Jackson Dart, a Colston Loveland, a Tedderell McMillan, someone like that. Personally, I am still very in on Genty. And I know it was an underwhelming rookie season, but that is relative to very, very high expectations. He was still the running back 15 at 14.4 points per game. He did that while being a part of just a brutal offense. This team had the lowest point per game number at 14.2, arguably the worst offensive line in the league. And that led to not so great efficiency, 3.7 yards per carry, but the pass catching work was there. The usage was strong. I didn't see anything out of Genty that would lead me to believe he's not the super talented player that he was drafted to be. And now with Pete Carroll gone, I think this is a really attractive, head coaching position where you have some staples on offense with Brock Bowers, Ashton Genty. You have the 101, so you have the potential quarterback of the future with Fernando Mendoza. And so I still think that Genty has a real opportunity to jump into that Bijan Gibbs range after this next season. So he will still be my top dog from this class. Now moving into tier two, I think there's going to be a lot of variance on how people view this kind of current clump of players. I'm actually going to go with Colston Loveland here as my number two player from the 2025 draft class. And a lot of this is just due to his huge breakout games over the last few weeks. I'm just very confident that Colston Loveland is a special football player. These are his numbers in his last three games. So last two regular season games, and then this is recorded before the playoff game against the Rams, but he has gone 6 for 94 and a touchdown, 10 for 91 and a touchdown, and then 8 for 137. He has commanded 37 total targets in those last three games. The usage has been fun. He's kind of moving all over, 43% inline, 31% in the slot, 24% out wide. And we have to remember, he is still a very young player. He doesn't turn 22 years old until April. So I'm just very confident that he is a top tier NFL tight end already. In my opinion, he is the Dynasty tight end 3. Obviously, this is tight end premium, like I mentioned at the top. So he gets a boost there. And I know he didn't have the super gaudy, overall rookie, tight end receiving numbers. But I think a lot of that is just Ben Johnson, being very strict. He runs a complicated offense. These rookies we saw with Luther Burden, it takes them a little while to really get unleashed. But we saw it, right? When the Bears needed it most, biggest game of the season in the playoffs, 8 for 137 as a rookie tight end. That is absurd. That gave Colston Loveland the edge here within this tier. The player that I just recently had him jump over was Jackson Dart, who I still think is a great dynasty asset moving forward. From a fantasy perspective, he was ultra productive this season, 20.1 points per game in 12 starts. And he did that with a pretty rough supporting cast around him. He lost Malik Neighbors. I want to say it was his first start. He lost Neighbors in that game. Scatabo looked awesome. He lost him, pretty much at midseason. They were rolling with Wan'Dale Robinson as their wide receiver one. I think, the big kind of separating factor for Jackson Dart is that rushing usage. 487 rushing yards, 9 rushing touchdowns. That is truly elite rushing production in 12 starts. And there are concerns about his play style, right? He does take a lot of hits. He doesn't really get down. I think he only had 1 concussion this season, but he went to the blue medical tent to get checked out a lot. I'd say I'm probably a little bit less concerned with that overall than most. I do think he can rein it in. I think with the offseason, a new coach in there, I think they're going to be able to rein it in a little bit. Now, I still think you want him to use his legs, and that's where he separates for fantasy. But I do think with Malik Neighbors back, it's also possible the Giants add to this group of weapons. If Jackson Dart is even a league average NFL quarterback and can just kind of stick around, he will continue to be ultra productive for fantasy. And I think when we're looking at the guys in this tier, and it's who is most likely to jump in and be a round 1 startup pick after the 2026 season, I think it's Colston Loveland and I think it's Jackson Dart. I think those two guys have the best 2 shots within this tier 2 range, which is why I have them, towards the top here. Then I'm going to go with Tetairoa McMillan here as my number 4 guy from the 25 class. Overall, just a really strong rookie season, 122 targets, 70 receptions, over 1,000 receiving yards, 7 touchdowns, 12.4 points per game was the wide receiver 20. He commanded targets at a high level. He had the 13th highest target share at 25.4%. He had a very high air yard share up at 40.9. I think the big issue here for Tetairoa McMillan is just the quarterback play, where he's probably going to have Bryce pretty much guaranteed 1 more year, potentially 2 more years. And I just don't think Bryce Young is ever going to be the guy that really elevates the weapons around him. And so from a talent perspective, I feel very good about Tetairoa McMillan. I think in a better situation, you could really see him, potentially pushing to be a round 1 startup pick. But just in this current, offensive infrastructure, it's tough to see the upside, but a young, talented player, I do think he firmly belongs within this tier. Then I'm going to go with Amarian Hampton, the running back 12 in points per game this season, averaging 15.1. He had kind of an interesting overall year 1 where he kind of has a slow start to the season. First 2 games, 8.1, 3.5 points. Then week 3 and week 4, he has 2 big time performances, 24.9, 27.5. Then he fractures his ankle in week 5, misses a lot of time, comes back in the last 4 games of the regular season, averages a solid 14.7 points per game, but is kind of in this committee with Kamani Vidal, never looked to be fully back. And then he injures his other ankle in week 17, which leads to him playing just a few snaps in their playoff game. So you're looking at running back 12 over 15 points per game. It looks solid, but it still felt just overall kind of underwhelming with all the injuries. I am someone, though, who is very high on the potential of this Chargers offense in 2026, where you get the stud tackles back with Joe Alt and Rashawn Slater. Greg Roman's gone. They potentially kind of buff the interior offensive line. And then you're just looking at an offense that really could be firing on all cylinders. I do think the Chargers want to use Hampton as the workhorse. As long as he can hold up physically and stay healthy, I think he's going to be a really strong fantasy pick. Now we're going to go back to some of the rookie selections, and I'm going to have both the 102 and the 103 up next here. And at this point, assuming that Jeremiah Love is off the board, I think you're going to be considering 4 potential names within this group. Now, things could change. Maybe one of these players slips. Maybe someone else gets crazy draft capital that we weren't expecting. But I think it's going to be one of the big 3 wide receivers or Fernando Mendoza. So Mekhi Lemon, Carnell Tate, Jordan Tyson, or Fernando Mendoza. It's kind of going to be, pick whichever wide receiver you like. If you need the quarterback, you like Fernando at the 101. I think these are all viable picks, but I would take these rookie picks just slightly after those more proven guys earlier on in this tier. Then the last actual player I have in tier two is going to be Travion Henderson. And I'm honestly a little bit conflicted on him and like his dynasty value moving forward. I was really high on him, going into the draft. I have a lot of him in Dynasty, like my ownership share is pretty high. And he certainly showed a lot of positives in the second half of the season where he really popped in his last 9 games, 17.1 points per game. He showcased that big play upside that I was really interested in. Coming into the season, he had 4 50-plus yard rushing touchdowns, which was just wild. He's attached to a great offense. Drake May's here. I also think there's room for improved receiving production, but there are still some like very legit holes in his game where he's great rushing on the outside, rushing out wide. He really struggles up the middle. I also am not super confident that the Patriots are ever going to commit to like using him consistently on the goal line, which does kind of take away some of that touchdown upside. And then also just like Ramondre Stevenson's here, I think at least through 2026, and is just like a good player. So I think when we're projecting for 2026 specifically, like when we compare him to Amarion Hampton or Ashton Genty, I just think both of those guys are going to project way better, at least, heading into next year. Also, pass protection needs to get a lot better, especially if we want to see that receiving upside kind of improve. I do think that'll come along, though. That was like one of his huge positives as a prospect. It was like he was great in pass protection, so much so that like even after the draft, I want to say it was Chris Ballard with the Colts was like mentioning just out of nowhere how great he was as a prospect in pass pro, like not when they were playing the Patriots or anything, just like a week after the draft. So it was like a widely kind of agreed upon thing, and it just didn't show up in year one. I still have hope that it can come around, but definitely some areas to improve there for Henderson. And then the last like asset I have within this tier, it's going to be the rookie 104. Once again, you're choosing from Lemon, Tate, Tyson, Mendoza. I think it's a strong tier. Those are going to be your options. Now, moving into the next tier here, we're going to be starting it off with the rookie 105. Like I mentioned, have all those guys kind of in a similar tier. It's just when you are being forced to pick the last guy there, the value is not going to be quite as great, but still totally fine with that rookie 105. I think the big drop off with Dante Moore declaring is now that 106 spot. But now looking at some of the players within this tier, I'm sure this order is going to be controversial. I could certainly hear arguments for these players to kind of be flipped around within this tier, but I'm going to start it off with Luther Burden. And I know he's going to be a super like polarizing player. You're going to have people like me who are super in on him. You're going to have a lot of people who are also just like very out on him at the cost I think he's going to get to this offseason. And he's not really like the type of player in year one profile that I'd typically be super in on, because you look at the counting stats, it's really nothing crazy. 60 targets, 47 receptions, 652 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns. I am just very confident that he is a special player. I'm sure you guys have heard all the hype about his yards per route run. This year, he was at 2.69. That was third in the NFL, only behind Puka Nacua and JSN, who are both like 20-plus point per game guys. Since 2014, he is third amongst rookie wide receivers in yards per route run. That is only behind Puka Nacua and OBJ's rookie seasons. And then the 2 players right behind him at fourth and fifth are A.J. Brown and Justin Jefferson. So on a per route basis, he is amongst just like elite company at the wide receiver position. And now sometimes yards per route run can be a little bit sketchy. You get these players that really pop in that statistic, but for whatever reason, they can't really get to like that full route participation, which is the concern for Luther Burden, right? Like he hasn't hit a 70+% route participation game this season. The reason why I am pretty optimistic that Luther Burden can get there is that there's not like one specific huge red flag about him as a player that would lead to him being like a lower route rate guy. A lot of times this happens with like these smaller kind of pure slot wide receivers, even like a Josh Downs, who I really like and, have been in on. We saw with him where like the Colts just do not trust him as a blocker in 2 wide receiver sets. But looking at Luther Burden, like he is not a slot only wide receiver. Even, just this past season, he played 54% of his snaps out wide. He also is just like straight up big enough to be an outside wide receiver. Like he's 6 foot tall, 206 pounds. He kind of had like the college usage of one of these like smaller gadget type players, but he's a pretty big dude. And then when you just watch him play, you can just tell he pops off the screen. He's a different level of athlete. He is so elusive. He's so explosive after the catch. And, the case is going to be against him. Like, why couldn't he beat out Olamide Zaccheaus early on in the season? Why is he still running less routes than like a DJ Moore, a Roma Dunze? And I do think, there's an argument there to kind of poke holes in his profile. But I do think it's fair to say that, like, with these rookies coming in, specifically when you look at Colston Loveland, Ben Johnson, his offense is complicated. He didn't just unleash these rookies right away. And when we look at when they finally unleashed Colston Loveland, right? Like he's been a monster over the last, 3-4 weeks of the season. He's that good of a player, and he didn't get unleashed until the last, 3-4 games. For Luther Burden, I don't think it's like an indictment on him as a player that he's kind of getting slow played. I think heading into year 2, the usage is going to be there. I'm just very in on him, and I'm confident that he is going to be a very productive player. And I also just think, like, from a dynasty perspective, I do feel like his ceiling is very, very high, where at some point he could end up being like a top 2-round startup pick, maybe with the upside of being like one of those truly elite mid to high end wide receiver ones. The other guy within this tier, or a couple of other guys, 2 tight ends. I've actually got Harold Fannin Jr. up first. I'm sure there's going to be some debate on, how these 2 wide receivers or how these 2 tight ends are ranked. Harold Fannin, just a super impressive year 1, 107 targets, 72 receptions, 731 receiving yards, 7 total touchdowns, was the tight end 8 at 11.7 points per game. And he did that with just truly horrible quarterback play, the second worst offense in terms of points per game. He had the 9th most receiving yards for a rookie tight end in NFL history. And earlier on in the season, I've been a big Harold Fannin guy. He's one of my, most highly rostered players in Dynasty. He was an auto pick for me, like in the early to mid 3rd round in rookie drafts this past year. So I've been a believer in the talent, taken a lot of stabs, a lot of swings at him. But I was kind of concerned where it's like, if there's a coaching change, if the Browns upgrade these weapons, is it possible we see Harold Fannin's usage kind of decrease? But then he just continued to log these super strong performances. He continued to be super productive. And even though he's not going to be like your prototypical inline great blocking tight end, I just think he's too talented of a player to take him off the field and turn him into like a part-time guy. Like he should be your slot wide receiver. He is good enough to do that. And so even with a new coach potentially coming in here, I think the talent's proven. I don't think you can take him off the field. And I still think, regardless of coaching staff, he should still continue to rack up the numbers within this offense. Just a really special athlete, despite not having like the freakiest athletic testing throughout the combine cycle. The final player in this tier, another tight end, I went with Tyler Warren. I did strongly consider going Warren over Fannin. I do think like Warren's value, his role is definitely a little bit more insulated, both because like he's retaining his head coach and then also just like draft capital wise, right? Like the Colts invested a lot more into him. And we really saw it was like a tale of 2 halves, or, a tale of pre-Daniel Jones injury and post. 13.1 points per game before Daniel Jones tore the Achilles, 6.3 points per game after that. I think the usage overall was really fun. He was 6th in target share at the tight end position, 4th in red zone targets, 6th in design touches per game, 3rd in first read targets per game, 2nd in design target share, and then 2nd in yak. So the Colts wanted to get him the ball. They wanted to get him the ball in important situations in the red zone, give him some opportunities to make plays after the catch. Love all of that. I will point out he's 2 years older than Colston Loveland, Harold Fannin. So when we're projecting like peak upside, is he going to get, significantly better than where he's at right now? I'm not so sure, especially relative to those other guys. And then also like his quarterback future is pretty uncertain, where I think like most likely it's going to be Daniel Jones coming off the Achilles as the week 1 starter next year. And there's just no guarantee that he's going to be close to the same guy. And if that's going to be, a super productive offense, or at least close to what it was this past season. Now, moving into tier 4, I'm going to start it off with Emeka Egbuka. I'm going to try to make this, a little bit quicker. I've been a little bit long-winded on some of these early guys. But for Egbuka, I feel like his season actually needs a lot of context. This was like the opposite trajectory that you normally see out of rookies, where typically rookies come in, they start a little bit slow, they don't have these like super established roles in their offenses, then they start to settle in, they start to produce, and then they really kind of break out over the second half of the season. And typically, their best games are coming towards the very end of the year. Complete opposite for Egbuka here. First 5 games of the season came out very hot, 20.5 points per game. Then in his last 12, fell all the way down to 7.8 points per game. And it was at the point where like towards the end of the season, he was like a part-time player as like the wide receiver 4 in this offense. So it started looking awesome. It ended pretty gross. I think there were a lot of different factors, both, with him personally, and then also just the situation around him that kind of led to this. You did have Egbuka a little bit banged up, especially when he started to take that dip early on after the first 5 games. Baker Mayfield was banged up. Baker also just kind of sucked, right? He was in like MVP talks early on in the season. The team, the offense completely cratered. Egbuka had his own issues, like his drop rate was way too high. It was up at 11.3%. That wasn't an issue he had in college. We saw the drops were really rough. Also, the chemistry between Egbuka and Baker just like completely cratered. On the season, Egbuka had a 58% catchable target rate. That is an absurdly low number. So it was just an overall rough situation. My overall takeaway here is that I think Egbuka is a good player. I think he's going to have a very productive, very solid NFL career, but I just don't think he's going to be this super high ceiling option. Like, I think he can be a wide receiver that can be a very solid wide receiver 2 for fantasy year after year. Maybe he peaks in like that back end wide receiver 1 range, but I don't think he's going to be one of these dudes that's like vying for a top 5 point per game season, throughout his career. So that's kind of my take on Egbuka. It'll be really interesting to see where his value kind of settles as a startup pick, but those are my thoughts right now. After Egbuka, I've got Cam Ward, and he's someone who's definitely kind of steadily rose up my rankings throughout the season, where overall, I'd say the rookie season was pretty encouraging, just like given the circumstances. This was an awful environment to play quarterback in. His head coach was fired mid-season. This was not an atrocious, but a below average offensive line. I think it's fair to say he probably had the worst weapons in the league. Like, his wide receiver 1 was Calvin Ridley, who broke his leg and was completely unproductive even when he was out there. Like, they were rolling out like these rookie wideouts like Jameer Dike, Alec Iamaner. Like, both of these dudes are going to appear later on in the video, but like day 3 rookie picks, like, yeah, they showed a little something, but like, should these dudes have even been on the field? I think that's a legitimate question. And I think what's really impressive is like, this situation didn't break him. He was logging his best games of the season towards the end of the year. It seems like he kind of started to figure some things out. We even saw that like in his last 3 full games, excluding week 18 where he left early, like those were 3 of his 4 best scoring games this season. So I do think like he is a starting caliber quarterback. I think as they build around him, he should be a lot better heading into year 2. I think the concerns are just like his overall upside, where he doesn't give you a ton on the ground. Like this past year, 159 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns. It's nothing crazy. So like, I don't think he's ever going to be a player that's like a top 2 round startup pick, but certainly someone that can improve and be a really solid, quarterback 2 for you in your super flex leagues. Then to close out this tier, I've got 3 rookie picks. So I've got the 106, the 107, the 108. The specific players within this tier are kind of up in the air. Like I mentioned earlier on, losing Dante Moore, who like looked like he was going to be the number 2 pick in this draft, does really suck because he would have been in like that locked in top 6 range. Now within this tier, you're looking at like Casey Concepcion, you got Boston, Sadiq, Ty Simpson maybe gets pushed up now as like quarterback 2. Maybe some of the running backs, Coleman, Price. Those are the names you're going to be looking at here. No one at this point stands out as being like, oh, this is a really fun pick you're having to make. at the 106, especially relative to like last year's class. But that's the overall grouping here with these picks. Then moving into tier 5, I've got 3 running backs that I just like was consistently flipping back and forth when I was prepping for this video. I ended up settling with Cam Scatabo. Then I went with Quinshawn Judkins. Then I went with RJ Harvey. And I think the Scatabo Judkins debate was pretty interesting because they both suffer like very similar season ending injuries where they dislocate the ankle, they fracture the fibula. I think Scatabo had like a little bit more ligament damage, but then he also did it earlier on in the season and will have more time to recover. And kind of like comparing and contrasting these dudes, for Cam Scatabo, I just think he has a super fantasy friendly skill set where he literally can be asked to do anything within the offense. In his 7 games as the running back 1, he averaged 17.8 points per game. He's a big physical runner. He can be that goal line guy, but he's also a great pass catching running back, which just like really ups his overall upside. He was an older prospect, so he'll turn 24 years old this offseason, but I also just like the overall offensive infrastructure this Giants team has more than Quinshawn Judkins. Now for Judkins, he was, the better viewed prospect, went early round 2. He is the younger guy, by I think like a year and a half compared to Scatabo, and he had a fine rookie season, 12.1 points per game, the running back 25. Like the numbers aren't going to look amazing. He was inefficient at 3.6 yards per carry, but he was playing behind an awful offensive line. It was a terrible offense overall, awful quarterback play. There wasn't really, a downfield threat within this offense. The weapons, especially at wide receiver, were also pretty terrible. He's coming back from the injury. We'll see if he's good to go for week 1. From what I've seen, it seems like he should have a chance to play in week 1 and be good to go. I think my big concern with Judkins and why I did have Scatabo ahead of him is it's the overall upside where he wasn't a huge pass catcher in college, only 2.6 targets per game this year. If he's just going to be like this early down grinder, you do need the situation to really improve around him. And this does not strike me as a team that's like 1 year away from being an above average offense. So those are my concerns. But I think he's a good player and, should have a very long NFL career as a fantasy relevant option. And then the other running back that ended up settling as like the third guy between these dudes, actually at one point did have him ahead of both of them. I went with RJ Harvey, and he's kind of had an interesting rookie season where he had a few games where he popped early on in the season, but this was primarily J.K. Dobbins' backfield. Then Dobbins goes down. RJ Harvey a week later gets like that rookie bye week. And then since then, the usage has been great. He's averaging 16.5 points per game, over 4 targets a game. He's getting a lot of the goal line usage. I think the big question for RJ Harvey is just like, do the Broncos trust him as their running back 1 heading into 2026? Because if they do, then you can certainly make a strong case that he should be, the highest ranked guy within this tier. But he's 25 years old. And so if they are bringing in, legit competition, they draft like a potential committee back, then it just looks like a significantly less desirable role for him. I think the hope is that he goes out, looks great in their playoff game. If they advance, he just continues to log these solid performances. But right now, I just think his 2026 role is very up in the air. I do really like the player, though, so I hope it works out for him. Then I'm going to go with Tyler Shuck. Very interesting player. He's someone who I actually have a lot of in Dynasty, and I'm not going to victory lap that I predicted Tyler Shuck would be some sort of amazing quarterback. I think my case for him was he's probably not going to be anything, but he gets round 2 draft capital, and I felt like it was very likely that he would get a chance to start in 2025. And once you get on the field, anything can happen. Quarterback evals are tough. You can also just have a few solid games and your value automatically is going to shoot up, kind of like we saw with Will Levis when he first got his shot. So it's if you really don't believe in the player at some point, there's probably going to be some sort of buy window. So in that late second round of rookie picks, he was definitely a go-to target for me. And it ends up, looking pretty solid. He started 9 games this season, 17.1 points per game. In his last 5 starts, up to 20 points per game. And this Saints team really did like a full turnaround once he took over. They were 1-7 when they decided to bench Rattler. With Tyler Shuck as the starter, they went 5-4. And like this team was kind of dangerous down the stretch. Like if you were going to pick one team to represent this division, I think the Saints were playing the best ball towards the end of the year. They end up being the only team that doesn't tie for that number one spot. But I think Tyler Shuck was a big part of that. He protected the ball, did take too many sacks. Like his pressure to sack rate was not great, but he gives you like a decent baseline rushing projection where he's probably going to be one of those quarterbacks in like the 300-yard range. You're hoping he gets 3 or 4 touchdowns. He is going to be the 2026 Week 1 starter. He's attached to Kellen Moore, who I really believe in. So for Tyler Shuck, like I know he's 26 years old. At the quarterback position, if he's productive, it really doesn't matter. If he goes out and has a solid 2026, he's going to be ranked way higher than this, throughout the rest of his career. I've got a few more guys in this tier. One of them is going to be Travis Hunter. And admittedly, he's a really tough player to rank. I was pretty optimistic about him throughout the process. I liked him both from a dynasty and a redraft perspective. I really thought he would get a lot of opportunities to prove himself on the offensive side of the ball. And I still fully believe that he was destined for a post-bye breakout. He has that breakout in week 7, 8 for 101 and a touchdown. They go into the bye week. All the reports are like, Travis Hunter's going to get unleashed. Liam Cohen's talking him up to the media. It felt like that week 9 game was going to be his. Then he suffers the knee injury in practice, out for the season. And he goes from like potentially having that huge breakout opportunity on offense to now like his 2026 wide receiver usage is very much in question, where you look at this wide receiver room and it's interesting because I don't really think you have any like game breaking, truly elite players, but you have 3 guys that you can very easily slot in as your starting wide receivers with BTJ, Jacoby Myers, and Parker Washington. And so we saw in 2025, Travis Hunter played almost like double the snaps on offense than defense. He played 323 offensive snaps, 162 defensive snaps. I think it's very possible that's closer to 50-50, even maybe shifting in the direction of defense in the 2026 season. Now, the one thing that could change all of this is a Brian Thomas Jr. trade. If they move BTJ, like it is wheels up for Travis Hunter. And I know some people are going to say that's Cope. I know Liam Cohen said, he expects BTJ to be with the team. Coaches are going to say that. They're not going to say, yeah, I'm expecting us to trade our young wide receiver. But I do think there's a real case that like BTJ's skill set is not going to be maximized within this offense. If you can get, a first round pick maybe is crazy, but if you can get a first and maybe give back a third, something like that with BTJ, I do think it could be interesting. For Travis Hunter, though, I still believe in the talent. I did consider ranking him lower just because I think there's probably going to be a buy window, probably lower at some point. Like if BTJ doesn't get traded and we're going into training camp and we're getting the Travis Hunter playing primarily at cornerback reports, like his value is really going to tank. But he's just a very unique asset where it feels like at any point in his career, he could have that potential breakout where it's like he could go out and play full-time corner in 2026, and then in 2027 they're short at wide receiver, and all of a sudden that's when he has his huge breakout. So obviously a unique asset to value in Dynasty. This is where I came in on him. I imagine this is going to be a little bit higher than consensus, but would be interesting to hear your guys' thoughts. Then I'm going to go with the rookie 109 here. So once again, kind of a similar range of players. You're looking at Casey Concepcion, Boston, Sadiq, Simpson, Coleman, Price. Maybe another running back makes a push, maybe a wide receiver gets better draft capital than we'd expect. Then I go back to a player with the Rondé Gadsden, and he kind of had the like Emeka Ibuka-esque rookie trajectory. I really liked Rondé Gadsden as like a late round dart throw, round 4, potential like taxi squad guy. And he was not projected to be, a huge part of this offense. He was a healthy scratch in week 1 and week 2, makes his debut in week 3, only runs 15 routes, but gets targeted 7 times, catches 5 of them for 46 yards. Then he has a couple of quieter games, but like the usage, the routes, the snaps, they start to rise. Then he goes on this 4-game big stretch from week 6 through week 9. These are his stat lines in those games: 7 for 68, 7 for 164 and a touchdown. That was like the nuclear performance. 5 for 77, 5 for 68. That's 17.9 points per game over those 4 games. Then Joe Alt goes down in that week 9 game. The Chargers offense craters. The Chargers shift, to some of the more pass blocking heavy tight ends with like a Tyler Conklin. So the usage starts to dip. The pass rate goes down. Pretty much everything just craters on this offense with the loss of Joe Alt. But I think there's some room for optimism in 2026. I talked about this with Hampton. The tackle's back. Greg Roman gone. I think this is a really interesting group of weapons because I feel like for the most part, you've got enough on offense with the exception of the interior offensive line. But I don't think they're going to spend, an elite draft pick, a high draft pick, or like spend big money in free agency on the wide receiver position, the running back, or tight end. You have Hampton. At wide receiver, you have Ladd, you have QJ, you have Trey Harris. It's not an amazing wide receiver room, but you've got like 3 guys that I think you feel decent about heading into next year. I think they'd feel decent about Gadsden. And so if I'm not expecting them to add to the position, and then I'm just looking at the guys around him, I don't think any of those dudes are just like these alpha wide receivers that are going to dominate the target share. And so you could certainly see a role where Gadsden really steps up, kind of becomes that focal point of the offense that we saw in that 4-game stretch. And maybe he does have a year or 2 breakout. I also think there are concerns where he is not that, great blocking tight end. And you do kind of need a coach that's going to just accept that and use him more. But some coaches are going to be like, all right, you're a 60% route rate guy, and they're going to use him like Dalton Kincaid, except for you're not the only target on a Josh Allen-led offense. So that's the downside for Gadsden. When I'm comparing him to some of these rookie picks, the question I'm kind of asking myself is like, would I rather have a Rondé Gadsden or Kenyon Sadiq? And I'm probably going to be a little bit lower on Sadiq than consensus. And as of right now, I'm leaning Gadsden, which is why I have him, just behind the 109, but I do have him ahead of the 110 through the 112, which are going to be the final picks in this last tier. So we're going to close out this tier with the final round 1 picks. I do think there's a pretty big drop off from Gadsden to the next player within this class. And as we kick off tier 6, that is where we get Jaden Higgins. And then I also think there's a case where Higgins is, probably a step ahead of the rest of these dudes in tier 6. But for Jaden Higgins, fine rookie season, 41 receptions, 525 yards, 6 touchdowns. I liked him as a talent. This was not a super exciting passing attack. The Texans frustratingly kind of slow played these rookie wide receivers. Higgins finally got more looks down the stretch. Jalen Noel, just a very frustrating season from him, especially when he was so efficient early on in the season. I'll touch on him a little bit later on. But I do think Higgins is a solid year 2 breakout candidate. Just needs to beat out Xavier Hutchinson, which I think he certainly should do. Also has an opportunity this weekend with Nico Collins out with that concussion. Then I have Bashal Tutin, and I understand if people think this is too high. As you can probably guess, I was very high on Bashal Tutin as a prospect, really liked him. You could certainly say this is me kind of holding on to my priors. He didn't have a good rookie season. He looked good in, a limited sample size in the playoff game. But I do think it's important to point out, right, with some of these running backs, like some of these guys might have been more productive in year 1, but like, were they really impactful to your fantasy team? I'm looking for guys that do have some upside, can actually be, legit starting options in your lineup. And I think Bashal Tutin has that upside. We cannot forget that in a year where Travis Etienne looked great, he had this major bounce back season, Bashal Tutin looked to be pushing a 50-50 split in week 11. He goes down with an ankle injury in that game. Then he's got the finger a few weeks later. He just never kind of regained his role in this offense. But there was a week where it's like, whoa, are the tides kind of shifting here? Like, is this going to turn into a very competitive committee? So there's that. You also have ETN, who's going to be a free agent. And I think it's possible, probable, that the Jaguars do bring him back. But you have Liam Cohen, who I think can kind of get rushing production out of anyone. You have Gladstone, who is kind of like this young, sharp GM. I think those two could get together and be like, we think you can get better rushing production or like similar rushing production with just a way lower cap number. And so I think it's possible that ETN goes elsewhere. And if that's the case, like it is just wheels up for Bashal Tutin. So that's my spiel on why I'm probably higher on him than consensus. I've got another running back with Kyle Monangai, plays for my Chicago Bears. Just looks like a great pick. Was a round 7, late day 3 pick. Had a really strong year 1. Was like the poor man's David Montgomery in this offense. 783 rushing yards, 4.6 yards per carry, 5 touchdowns, 18 receptions for 164 yards. You're just hoping the Bears are kind of content with this current running back room, with Swift and Monangai kind of having this really close split. If they are, I think Kyle Monangai, is a solid piece to have in Dynasty. Then I'm going to go with Matthew Golden. This might be low to some people. I know a lot of people like them as a prospect. Personally, I was very low on him, and the rookie season just kind of confirmed a lot of my concerns. He was targeted 40 times, caught 29 of them for 361 yards, didn't get into the end zone in the regular season. And it was just pretty discouraging that in a year where Jaden Reed missed a lot of time, Christian Watson started the season on PUP. Like there were opportunities here for Matthew Golden to break into this offense, kind of make an impact, and he just didn't. Now, I do think there's an interesting buy window because he did have his best game of the season in the playoffs, 4 for 84 and a touchdown. Had a really nice screen yak touchdown that was very frustrating to watch live, but that could open some things up. Maybe you still believe in him. The reason why I'm willing to just kind of pivot off of Matthew Golden at this point is that he never projected, at least to me, as a super high upside player. He never had a truly dominant season in college. He really only broke out as the wide receiver 1 for Texas because of the Isaiah Bond ankle injury. He was clearly behind Bond early on in that season before Bond got hurt. And then he goes to the Packers, which is a team that is just so anti-force feeding one guy at wide receiver. And so you've got this crowded group of weapons where I do believe Romeo Doubs is a free agent, but Christian Watson's got 1 more year. I think he could certainly earn an extension. He's been great this season. You have Jaden Reed still under contract. You have Tucker Kraft, who's going to be back next season. And so just not super high on the player. I don't think it's a great environment to be just a random weapon in, and then there's a lot of target competition. So that's my spiel on Matthew Golden. Then I've got Woody Marks. I think some people are going to think this is too low, especially compared to, a guy like Bashal Tutin or even Kyle Monangai. Woody Marks did come in and take over as the Texans starting running back. He got up to 15 opportunities per game on the season. I'm just not super convinced that Woody Marks is even a good player. He was very inefficient on the ground. The big kind of red flag for me was the lack of receiving usage. This is a guy we're coming into the NFL. I was thinking his role, especially as a fantasy producer, would be a James White, JD McKissick-esque upside role where he would just be super involved as a pass catcher. This dude caught 83 passes in his sophomore season in college. He only averaged 2.3 targets per game on the Texans here. He's an older prospect. He's 25 years old. I would just not be shocked if he is straight up replaced heading into next year as the starter, or if he's in a very competitive committee with another running back. Another older running back here with Bill Krosky-Merritt. A lot of people seem to be underwhelmed with his rookie season, and maybe it's just because he gained so much hype coming into the season, but he had a pretty awesome year for a round 7 rookie pick, 805 yards, 4.6 yards per carry, 8 touchdowns, caught 9 passes for 68 yards. He will turn 25 this offseason, so that's a concern. I imagine the Commanders are going to add to the position heading into next season. But maybe he continues to improve, kind of locks down that early down role, which is kind of capped, but will be more valuable this next year with Jaden Daniels healthy. A couple more guys in this tier. Trey Harris kind of had a redshirt rookie season, crowded wide receiver room, Ladd, QJ, Keenan Allen. He did earn more playing time later on in the season. The coaches seem to really like him, really trust him. I do think if Keenan Allen's gone, he will be a starting wide receiver for them next year. And maybe he develops into big play downfield X wide receiver for Justin Herbert. And then the last player in this tier, Terrence Ferguson, when we're getting into this range of the class, you're really kind of just throwing your darts on guys you think are interesting. And I do think Ferguson is an interesting kind of like developmental player here. Didn't have a huge role in year one. 11 receptions for 231 yards, 3 touchdowns. He did have 2 solid games to close out the year, 3 for 33 and a touchdown, 2 for 54 and a touchdown. He's an elite athlete, 9.57 relative athletic score. We saw Blake Corum in this offense pretty much have like a redshirt freshman season where I think a lot of people, including myself, were like, man, he might just be cooked. They draft Jarquez Hunter. Like, I don't know, he might just kind of, have fallen out of favor. Turns out it seems like McVay just like wants these guys to kind of get their feet wet a little bit, not give these rookies huge roles with the exception of Puka Nacua just because, he's the GOAT. And so I think it's possible. Like we saw Corum come in and pretty much push a 50-50 split with Kyron Williams. The Rams got a lot of production out of their tight end position despite, I think it was Colby Parkinson led with like 408 receiving yards. They were 4th in total tight end receiving yards. Higbee's a free agent. Parkinson has 1 year left on his deal. He could get cut. I don't think he does though, because like he is coming off a really strong season. But I think Ferguson could take a nice leap in year 2, and then maybe year 3 is like when he really emerges. But he was like a early to mid round, round 2 pick. So he's got the draft capital. He's a good athlete. Showed some encouraging signs early on in the season. Great offensive environment. A lot of factors that lead me to believe he's, a fun kind of later round pick in your startups. And then the final tier, I've gone on for way too long so far, so I'm kind of just going to run through these names, maybe point out a few things. Pat Bryant, Gunnar Helm, Mason Taylor, Jalen Knoll, Chimere Dike, Torrey Horton, Alec Iamaner, Shedeur Sanders, Dylan Sampson, Devin Neal, Caleb Johnson. That's the final tier. Pat Bryant looked to be kind of improving his role in this offense. Suffers that rough injury. We'll see. I am kind of sketched out on a lot of these like Broncos wide receivers. They draft some dudes with like decent capital. They all kind of have their moments. They pop in different metrics and then it just like doesn't really pan out. Gunnar Helm, I think, is really interesting as like a later round tight end pick in startups. His yards per route run was like really strong, especially given the offense he was a part of. It seems like Chigo Okonkwo was unlikely to re-sign. Very possible we go into next year with Gunnar Helm as the Titans clear-cut tight end 1. I'm probably a lot lower than consensus on Mason Taylor. I was never huge on him as a prospect. The rookie season was fairly underwhelming. Like he was one of the only guys that was like even a competent pass-catching weapon. Jalen Knoll, frustrating usage. I thought he was really interesting early on in the season. They just never gave him the opportunities. We'll see if they bring Christian Kirk back. Like that would be the role for him. Also Tank Dell. I love Tank Dell, but man, that was a rough injury and kind of like a smaller, not a freak athlete. I don't know how he looked coming back. We got Chimere Dike, Torrey Horton, Alec Iamaner. This is like that range at wide receiver where all of these guys kind of popped in different spots. They might be just like solid, relevant NFL players, but are these guys really difference makers for fantasy? I do really like Torrey Horton, but like you got JSN, Rashid Shaheed. I'm not sure if they re-upped him yet, but they certainly could. Shedeur Sanders, I imagine some people are going to think this is way too low. I would just like to like remove the name from this and like you just look at his profile. Day 3 pick. The year 1 numbers were atrocious, took way too many sacks, held onto the ball for way too long, put the ball in danger way too many times. New coaching staff coming in. Like this is just not a desirable situation. It is possible like he never goes into a season as like the starter ever again. Like I do think he could be a backup. He'll probably start a game again at some point, but like in terms of a team really going into a season or even a week, without an injury, relying on him to be the guy, I just don't think it's super likely. I do think though, like I actually originally had him, I think below at least a couple of these running backs. The one thing about him though is like anytime he has a good game, there's probably going to be at least one dude in your league that like really likes him and is going to be trying to buy. So that's the upside. I just don't think he's going to be a starting caliber quarterback. That's my take. Sue me. Dylan Sampson showed some things rookie year, going to be behind Quinshon Judkins, maybe get some more run with the new coaching staff. Devin Neal a part of this like weird Saints running back room where he was emerging as the starter late in the year, but that's because the Kamara injury. Then the other guy goes down who's escaping me right now. Round three pick. TCU, Dennis Allen just hated his guts. Had to look it up. Kendre Miller. So like he had emerged a little bit, then he goes down for the season. Then Devin Neal ends up going down for the season also. And then the last guy in my top 36, Caleb Johnson. Maybe a new coaching staff kind of revives things here. I was never a big Caleb Johnson guy. This was like a truly atrocious rookie. Like he didn't even get on the field as a round three pick walking into a weaker running back room. Like I like Jalen Warren. You had Kenneth Gainwell there, who certainly, made some noise later on in the season, but like that is not a good running back room. And Caleb Johnson couldn't even break into it. Not listed here, but you've got some of those like wide receivers who I did find interesting, like a Kyle Williams, Jack Besh. They just really didn't do anything. Tez Johnson could be interesting. But that's going to wrap it up here for re-ranking the 2025 draft class. If you guys stuck around till the end, I appreciate it. This was definitely a longer one. Would love to hear any thoughts you have down below in the comments. But thank you all for stopping by. Stay tuned after the national championship game. Going to be going through like my first sets of rookie rankings. I think it'll probably be like top 10 wide receivers, top 10 running backs, and then probably like a top 24 overall. So stay tuned for all of that. Thank you for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.